Welcome to Networking RX, a podcast devoted to helping business professionals like you enhance your networking skills in order to become more proficient giving and receiving quality business referrals and improving the overall quality of your life and the lives of those around you. The Networking RX podcast is a production of AmSpirit Business Connections, an organization whose mission is to empower business success through networking.
I live in Columbus, Ohio. I'm not from here, but I live in Columbus, Ohio, and I look at a map of Ohio, and if you're from Ohio, you certainly know this, and it's probably true largely across the Midwest. I think the East Coast, it's a little more congested, but certainly across the Midwest, you will notice that there are decent-sized towns in most states, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, outside of Chicago, and they're all about 15 miles apart. And I saw a video on YouTube about this and why that's the case. And it really has to do with the notion of when these towns started. And a lot of them started on waterways, or certainly the Erie Canal. But that was the distance that a horse could travel. And so you spent your life in this, I don't want to say it was a little town, because at that point in time, it probably seemed like a big town, but that's where your life was. And those are the people you got to meet. And that was kind of your own little LinkedIn group, if you will. And the notion of, hey, there was somebody who's 15 miles away who it wasn't there. And you had a problem to solve. You had to solve the problem yourself with the people that you lived with. And the notion of maybe going to that other town and having a problem solved just really, it was a horse ride away. So you just didn't really embrace it. The world's changing. The world has changed. I mean, it's already changed if you haven't figured it out. And we're not using horses to go between pockets of people. We're using electronics, and there are people out there that are really kind of facilitating or empowering this. One of those people I've got today on the program, Chris Giddings, and he runs Cogent Connections. It's a marketing agency that specializes in LinkedIn-based B2B business development. And he's known throughout certainly the Jersey area, Jersey and Philadelphia, of hosting not just virtual networking groups, but in-person professional mixers across that area. And he's got executive lunches and peer advisory groups. I wanted to bring him on, like I bring a lot of people on, to talk about networking and what he's seeing. And he's heard the beginning part of this program. And anyhow, and he went to school in Ohio, so he gets what I'm saying about how the little towns are all about 15 miles apart. So, Chris, welcome to the program.
That's right. No, I know all too well all the distance between the towns in Ohio. Lots of cornfields.
Yes.
Glad to be here.
Yeah.
So,
tell me about your journey. Tell us about your journey.
About my personal journey. So it starts in Ohio.
Okay.
I went to Case Western Reserve in Cleveland, and I was working at the Cleveland Clinic with ADHD kids during the summers, which was a really fulfilling job. And due to the series of circumstances we only have time to go into, I transitioned from working in psychology to working in marketing. And I actually joined a marketing firm in Cleveland where I worked for 9 months up until COVID hit. And when COVID hit, the company went under. Because there's this thing in marketing where when times are good, you want to invest in your marketing. When times are bad, you need to invest in your marketing. And when there's a crisis, everything falls apart.
Right.
Buying or selling, everyone's waiting. And so they're reducing expenditure by cutting off services. So this company went under. And soon after that, I already had all these relationships. And one of them actually reached out to me and said, Chris, I liked working with you. Is there a way I could keep doing that? I don't want to hire you, though. And so I had to form an entity to service this one business. And it just kind of spiraled into me running a marketing agency. I moved back to New Jersey because that's where I grew up. And running a marketing firm, one of the fun things about doing that is you can work from anywhere. And so I love being close to my family. And I also love the region. I love being close to New York and close to Philly and close to DC and close to Boston. Like, it's a good central location to be living and operating. And there's a lot of wonderful people here. There's a lot of diversity, all kinds of people from all kinds of backgrounds and ages, and it's fulfilling. Not to mention historic. But I know we want to talk about how the world's becoming a smaller place, and I spent a lot of my time meeting people and getting to know people. Again, all different sorts of folks, but especially business leaders and business development leaders. And one thing I find as a marketer and as a networker is that there's always more you can be doing. In many jobs, like let's say you're the CFO of a company, you can, create all your financial sheets, and you could actually at some point be done and be totally caught up and have no more work to do.
You know what? My wife's a financial person, and that actually happens. Hey,
Exactly.
okay, I'm done for tonight. I've got things reconciled. I'm good.
I can't relate to that. There's
No.
always more, right?
Yeah.
And so when you're in that environment, and this applies to sales, marketing, networking, you have to think critically about, okay, I have a certain amount of time, I have a certain
Right.
amount of energy, I have a certain amount of ability to engage in financial expenditure. So, you've limited resources. How can I maximize the impact of those resources collectively and also individually to improve, how effective I'm going to be versus the next networker or the next marketer or the next salesperson? Because if I want to be effective, we kind of do have to compare ourselves to what the average is of how someone's going to perform. And that requires a lot of creativity. One thing that I love to do whenever I network is I love to talk to people who are in really difficult jobs. So anyone who's in an MLM, we give a lot of flack to people who work in MLMs, but their jobs are hard. It's not only that the MLMs are potentially taking advantage of them, but it's also that, if you're surviving an MLM, it means that you're really working hard to make ends meet. If you work in an insurance business, there's tons of life insurance agents everywhere you go, tons of financial advisors everywhere you go, and their businesses are not very well differentiated to the layperson. One financial advisor could tell me why they are great, and a second one could tell me why they're great, and I'm not really going to understand who's better, right? And so when you talk to them, you want to ask, what are you doing to gain clients? What is separating you out from your competitors, and what's actually making a difference for you? And oftentimes it's going to be those professionals that have the best, most interesting strategies for how they're getting ahead that you can then take back to your own business, right? So again, time, energy, financial expenditure, also impact. Oftentimes when we talk about our businesses, we think about ROI, and ROI is okay. For per unit resources I've spent, how much is coming back to me? Impact is ROI for you plus ROI for everybody else who's touched by your actions. And so I like looking at that as an additional KPI to be just taken into consideration into a strategy. One of the things you can do to be an especially effective networker and to really drive high returns on those investments you're making is to become an organizer, to host gatherings, or to give talks, right? So to put out content that a lot of people are going to see, to have a strong online presence, or to bring people together and to spend more of your time on that than even on individual meetings. So that's something we could talk more about, but I'm glad to kind of pass back to you and see where we want to take the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what the question I had written down here for you is, at what point did you realize kind of this networking thing, right? Because I think and I've said this a lot of times on this program, we all went to high school, and high school and college are really geared towards getting you a job.
Yeah.
They don't talk networking. They don't talk any of this stuff. Someone might give lip service to it, but they're really, your high school guidance counselor has a job. He doesn't have to worry about his paycheck, right? Your college professor's got a job, doesn't have to worry about a paycheck, and so they can give lip service to this thing we'll call networking, air quotes. And so at some point you have to figure it out, like, oh, okay, yeah, it is literally not what you know. It's who you know, and it's even more than that. It's what you do with those relationships. When was that moment for you where it was like, geez, yeah.
Well, man, I don't know if there was a single moment, but
Okay.
one that helped me a lot in learning how to talk to people, because again, that's not a skill you learn in school, right? Professionally speaking, having to talk to your adults. There's this point where you're a student and everyone you talk to is a Mr., Mrs., or doctor or professor. And then you snap your fingers and all of a sudden someone says, call me Steve. And you're like, what? Right? Like, I'm not allowed to do that. That goes against my
Yeah.
entire life history of what's respectful and appropriate. And it's really hard for people with more life experience to look at young adults and to realize that these folks just don't know what they don't know. And you go out there and you're like, what's the rule book? I'm the oldest of three boys. And when I was applying to colleges, one thing that really frustrated me was not knowing what the rules are. What are the
Mm.
colleges really looking for? Right? My parents
Yeah.
didn't know.
Yeah.
Nobody around me really had good answers for me, but it seems like my colleagues, like, well, my fellow students, they had more information than I did. And I had to trudge along and figure it out. And by the time I really felt like I had a grasp on what was going on, the process was over.
Yeah.
And, same thing for like when I first started high school. Again, the oldest of three. What's the deal with high school? You go to a new place, you're surrounded by all these new people. And I really felt like I understood high school and how to be a successful high school student and how to do high school well by the time high school is over. And I felt the
Yeah.
same with college, right? And I got really kind of sick of figuring everything out when it was concluding. And when I was working at my first, marketing job, I have to give my boss a lot of credit because he would have sales calls, and I would set up meetings for him, and then he would pull me into his meetings, and he would set up a conference call. And this was again, even in 2019, we
Right.
weren't using Zoom yet. It was all still phone, and
Yeah.
so we'd be able to be on a phone call together. And because we weren't showing our faces, he could gesture to me, he could write me notes in real time in the conversation, telling me what was going on and what he was doing and why. And there is nothing better for learning than to get that instant feedback.
Yeah.
And I'm a sponge. I love to absorb information. I love to dive in. And he let me sit in on a few of these calls. And then I kind of just started pushing and I started contributing to the calls. And I started contributing more and more to the calls. And then as I was contributing, he would give me feedback on how I was managing the conversations. And then we got to a point eventually where I was having the calls and he wasn't saying anything and he was just sitting there. And that was a huge breakthrough for me in understanding how to speak to people professionally
Right.
and how to navigate sales and how to have sales conversations with strangers, which is a really challenging, scary thing, but not nearly as scary once you're good at it. It's kind of like how, for many people, the idea of swimming in the ocean or performing on stage might seem really scary, but to folks who do that all the time, it's not.
Right.
Um, so when people look, you're absolutely, your point really resonated with me around how many students or, the school system is all about helping students find a job and land a job.
Yeah.
And all, the way that my parents were raising me and the way the school system teach me is all around that too.
Yeah.
I'm in a very weird position in my own life where I spent so many years building up my resume only to never use it once for anything. I could
Oh,
have
yeah.
barely, I could have gotten D's in all my classes and been in the same position I am today. But instead, I worked to get really good grades and everything else. And you just don't know. And I'm glad that I worked hard, but it does kind of feel ridiculous looking
Well,
back.
but
Not spending
I
time.
guess my pushback on that is you've learned how to learn,
Yes,
right? And
absolutely.
Case Western, I went to a small liberal arts college. Case Western's very similar. It's they teach you how to learn, and that's a versatility. Just quick question: what do your parents do?
So my dad runs a small architecture business. So he
Okay.
actually is an entrepreneur. And my mother used to be a chemical engineer.
Okay.
She got her PhD from Princeton in chemical engineering. She worked at Rhodia for a few years, and then she became a homemaker.
Okay. Yeah, my dad was a college professor. My mom taught high school math. So the notion of being self-employed, I remember I have two siblings. I'm the middle child, so I had the benefit of an older brother. I totally, I was listening when my older brother was scheduling classes and going off to college, and I had that benefit. But we all became entrepreneurs, self-employed within a year of each other, or excuse me, within a month of each other in 1995. And my dad was like, "What are you guys doing? You should just get a job. Hire somebody." And
True.
it's a different world. And I do see people out there who have parents who are entrepreneurial, um, and just really kind of having a leg up. You know?
Oh, oh yeah. And whenever I meet young professionals, like one of my hobbies is in the evenings. Sometimes people will refer their unemployed friends to me or their friends who
Yep.
are students, and I will give them an hour of my best advice. Be like, look, here's the framework. Here's the information that I wanted to know that would have equipped me to, feel a lot more confident what I was doing when I was your age. And they really value it. When you
Yeah.
have information that resonates with people that they're able to take action on, it's really fulfilling to be able to share it. And it's definitely a little bit healing to be like, hey, it was so frustrating to me to not have this knowledge, but I'm doing something about it. And there's a lot to share. Is so much information that pretty much every student doesn't know that's approachable and is going to make such a huge impact on their career journey.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is around networking. And it's like, how do you build relationships? How do you handle rejection? What's appropriate to do or to not do around asking for help? And I'll just share one example with you. Every student has a secret superpower. And that secret superpower is that professionals in general really find it fulfilling to help students and to understand what it's like to work in the professional sphere. So if you, as a student, reach out to people in the industry that you want to work in and request a 15-minute call with them to ask them some questions about their jobs, they will say yes. And they'll say yes eagerly. And you'll actually brighten their days by giving them the opportunity to help you. When I was a student, I was so afraid of rejection. I was okay with rejection when it happened, but I was fearful of the concept in theory. And I
Hmm.
also just didn't want to be a bother to people. And I didn't realize didn't have the tools or understanding or information to realize that I could and should go out into the professional world and seek out advice and relationships with people who are established in the spaces I'm working. And I would have learned a lot faster that maybe I should have transitioned to marketing from psychology if I'd had more of those conversations, right? I would have
Yeah.
been better equipped to start my business. I would have been more confident in starting my business rather than letting it happen as an accident.
Yeah.
And I probably would be more successful today. So I encourage anyone who's a student to use LinkedIn specifically to find people in the industries that you might want to work in when you graduate and to begin building relationships with them and learning from them because they want to help you and you're gonna have a lot of fun having those conversations too.
No, I think that's great advice. Um, I talked to a friend of my daughter's she went to college with, and parents were, hey, you need to talk to Mr. Agin, talk to Mr. Agin. Call me Frank. But I remember having, he knows networking and getting on the phone with this young woman and just saying, okay, are you on LinkedIn? Yeah, I've done that. Like it was a box to check. I'm like, okay, but
Yeah.
what are you doing on LinkedIn? And by the time the conversation was over, it was like I had shown fire to a caveman. She was, oh my gosh. So what you're saying is LinkedIn is not a box to check, but it's something to do. It's something to operate in. Yes. And I'm always amazed at, because similarly, I'm talking to my friends, my kids' friends who are graduating or out there trying to make it in the working world, reaching out to me and just need a little advice. And it's like, sometimes I don't share things, Chris, because I feel like it's so common knowledge. Everybody must understand this. And
Yeah.
then you start to realize, oh my gosh, nobody understands these things. And it's not like it's not quantum physics or anything like that, but it's to your point exactly. People out there are willing to have a conversation with you, reach out. They feel a value to have somebody have that conversation with them.
Yeah.
So do it.
Yeah, and it works for everybody, not just students, but students, it's even easier because
Yeah.
everyone, no one's going to expect anything in return, and they're really going to enjoy talking to you. And when you help somebody, you feel like they're on their journey with them, and it's really
Yeah.
fun. When if you're advising someone who's a student, you're not dealing with all the insecurities and vulnerabilities and all the scariness of not knowing what your future holds. You're
Yeah.
just sharing in the excitement of all the possibilities that exist for them.
Yeah.
So it's really fun. And
Well, yeah.
fun's important. And
Yeah.
that's one thing that I like. One of my core values as a professional is the importance of fun and to weave fun into our professional networking events, to weave fun into how we operate day to day, to weave fun into the conversations you have and the networking experiences you have and the way you deploy your time. And to recognize that your job isn't just, something you do as part of your life to support the rest of your life. It's part of your life.
Yeah.
And it deserves to be a part of your life that's exciting and interesting and fulfilling just as much as the other parts of your life are.
Yeah. Well, you had kind of alluded to it earlier that the networking is never done. There is not. I mean, people say, well, we'll pick on a teacher. teacher comes home, maybe grades papers, but there's a line there where it's like, okay, I'm done being a teacher. Now I'm just going to be a member of the community. With you, the if there's a line, it's very blurry.
Yeah,
It's
it's nebulous.
yeah, it's like drawing with a felt tip pen on a porous sheet of paper. It just kind of bleeds all over the place.
It's true.
Um, and you're constantly on. You're constant. I find that I'm constantly when I say networking, I'm not pitching people about business, but it's always okay. Where does this dot potentially connect with another dot? Um, and how does that benefit someone, even though it might be a personal conversation of some sort?
Yeah. I love how you bring that up, because one thing that I've encountered a few times just really surprised me is how much people who don't network hate networking. Like people who aren't part of that world, they're like, "Ooh, a networking event. That sounds gross. It sounds like it's going to be really impersonal. It sounds like it's going to be really inauthentic. And it sounds like everyone's going to be there just trying to pitch one another." And it's not like events where those things happen don't exist. But networking generally isn't like that. Networking is one of my most, the things I enjoy doing the most. And networking is just meeting people in a professional context and getting to know them better, and then finding creative ways to pull them into your life. And there's all kinds of ways you might do that. And when you're talking to people in a professional context, one of the benefits of that, and this goes whether you're talking to them over LinkedIn or in person or really anywhere, they're their most professional. Well, they're their best versions of themselves. And it's really nice getting to engage with people when they're on their best behavior and they're trying to be them best selves for you. Again, lean into that. And you don't have to deal with maybe the ugly parts of their life, because that's not what they're showing. It's possible to get a lot of fulfillment, to be very financially successful, and to build relationships that even extend beyond the workplace. One thing, I made a commitment a year and a half ago to host a professional mixer at least once a month in an evening, every single month, and somewhere in New Jersey or in Philly. And I've ended up doing it more than once a month, many months. But many of the friends that I've made, I've also begun inviting to game nights. And I made a commitment a few months ago to also begin hosting a personal social once a month, in addition to the professional social. And it's the case that 2/3 of the people in my social circle are folks that I initially met in a professional context and still know in a professional context, in addition to that, because relationships are relationships.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you say gaming, like online gaming or
like board games.
okay,
So
yeah. No, I mean, I'm not. I have a few friends, and they're really into the D&D, Dungeons and Dragons. A lot of it's done online. They met professionally, right? And somebody mentioned, oh yeah, I don't even know the words. I was D&Ding, and somebody else said, oh, you do that? I'm really into that too. And so they have these professional interactions, and then they also have these D&D interactions. It's great. Like you just said, I love it. It's networking is networking. Relationships are relationships. And it's just, so let's shift gears here quickly. Let's talk about, Cogent connections, types of things you're doing there, and your events and how people can help you. Some of your events are virtual, so that opens them up to people around the world, really.
True. And we have people from around the world who join. Cogent Connections is a marketing firm, and we specialize in helping businesses use LinkedIn as part of their marketing strategy, really around their business development and sales strategy too. So more on the business development and sales side of marketing. There's all kinds of reasons you might need to initiate relationships. It can be to seek good hires who have certain qualifications, and to not just put up a job posting, but to say, I want to find all the people who live near me who meet these criteria and might be qualified to work in my company. That way I can ensure I get the best candidate. I want to seek out investors. I want to seek out people who might acquire my business. I want to seek out businesses I can acquire. I want to seek out clients. I want to seek out key referral partners. I want to seek out networking partners, right? There's LinkedIn can let you and support you in doing that. And often it's one of the more time efficient, energy efficient, financially efficient ways of building certain kinds of relationships. And so we advise all kinds of companies on how to take action. And sometimes we'll take action on their behalf. We also do design and branding projects and content creation, just like most marketing firms do. But we don't do SEO, or we don't do fancy websites. And we're not really a content-based firm. When it comes to events, I'm organizing at least one professional in-person mixer every single month. And the mixers we organize are really fun and unique. They truly are. And I'll share some just quick examples of the ones we have coming up. In a week and a half, I'm organizing a professional karaoke night.
Oh, wow.
In New Jersey.
Yeah.
And 2 weeks after that, I'm organizing a tea party in a local mansion that's a networking event. And then the week after that, I'm involved in organizing a bus crawl, a networking bus crawl. We're going to get a bunch of people on a bus, and they're going to go to different businesses and do an activity and have food and drink at each business over the course of the week. Really, really fun. And then 2 weeks after that, doing a paint and sip fundraiser for a nonprofit, where there's going to be an art activity and people are going to have wine at a winery. So you're finding really creative, fun ways to bring people together professionally and to do business, but to also not make it boring, right? To make it fulfilling in and of itself. And in addition to those gatherings, I organize a virtual networking group once a month. It's called Super Connectors. And the theme of that group, the differentiator, is that everyone in that group is someone who we see as a great connector. And so the group is just filled with high quality people. And we have a particular format we like to run the call in that we find to be very efficient and effective. We also run a free peer advisory group once a month called the Corner Call. And it's called the Corner Call because we're in your corner, helping you round the corner with your business. And it is essentially like a Vistage or Tab Lite. If these groups generally go 4 or 5 hours, and they're in person, and they cost $1,000 plus a month to be a part of. This group is only 1 hour. It's on Zoom. You can show up when you want to. You don't tell me if you're not coming. And we get business owners that come to the call with an issue that they need help on, and they're put in a room for an hour with 5 other businesses that are just there to help them. And they dive deep into solving that issue together. Not just talking about it, not mastermind. It's about moving the needle, taking action, getting work done, making introductions, brainstorming, creating strategies, all of that. And most recently, my new commitment for 2025 is to organize executive lunches. We're going to get CEOs of local companies together for lunch at fancy restaurants, hopefully once a week. So we're experimenting with that. We did 4 of these lunches in 2024. They were all super fun. And they were so successful that I really want to, commit to doing as many as possible this year. And it's been a great way for me to meet a lot of really interesting business owners, and for them to meet one another. Not everyone golfs. Not everybody, and business owners are generally lonely, and they love talking about work, and they're generally charismatic. Their spouses don't want to hear about work all the time. Their employees, you can't always share everything with them. Yeah. But when they get together for lunch, they just hit things off. You don't need to do a lot to manage those conversations. And so creating those opportunities for them to meet and really, again, build relationships that turn into friendships outside of work is a really fulfilling thing to facilitate. And it's really cool for me to get to meet all those businesses too. So that's all the stuff we have going on.
That's a lot. Is there a website we can direct people to?
Yes. It is cogentconnections.io.
Okay.
And then you can also find me on LinkedIn, Christopher Giddings on LinkedIn. Just send me a connection request, and you can mention that you heard this podcast.
Cogentconnections.io. Okay.
Yep.
I'll get that in the show notes. I really appreciate your time today. This was enlightening. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thanks for joining us on the Networking RX podcast. Please put what you've learned into action today, and let us know if you have questions, comments, or ideas for future topics. You can email them to us at podcast@amspirit.com. That's AMSPIRIT.com. Finally, so you never miss an episode, be sure to subscribe to the Networking RX podcast through iTunes, Overcast, or however you receive your podcasts. Now get out and network with someone.
The Networking RX podcast is the copyright production of AmSpirit Business Connection. All rights reserved.